have one light. Yeah, one light. Okay. The third phase is actually when you are going to hold your DSLR or DSLR light camera. So the right way of holding, so because we have come through these phases of cell phone and point and shoot, everyone tries to hold it the same way. Trying to hold it like this. Okay? This is not a very convenient way because it puts a lot of strain on your hands, one. Secondly, there is a lot of possibility for shake because these cameras are heavier. So you get bad pictures. Okay. Because of this, the other thing is to hold it like a point and shoot camera. So you hold it like this, it is not very steady again. So for steadiness, it has been shown that you require at least 3 points. That is called the tripod. So you try and frame a tripod with whatever you have. You have 2 legs, so stand and fix this viewfinder against your eye. Okay. So now you have got a 3-point fixation for your camera, or you can take it as your hands and 3-point fixation. Okay. So once you have this stability, you will be able to shoot much more photographs without a camera shake. The basic thing that is to avoid is camera shake. Okay, that is about the tripod. Second is how to hold the camera per se. Thank you. So these are heavy equipment, they are also expensive equipment, so make sure that they don't fall accidentally. First step, or keep it on your wrist so that in case it falls, you have something to hold on to. Okay, so that is first. When we start, we usually start like this. Your left hand goes underneath and the palm rests on the body, the rest is on the lens. So this gives you a very good grip, a very good support. Fix your fingers around this one. The index finger goes to the shutter and the thumb goes to the buttons at the back. So this is something like this. Okay, index finger here and thumb. Many of the higher version cameras will have buttons at the back which can be handled with your thumb. You don't have to take it out of your eye at all. Why should we not do this or even this and use the viewfinder? Because it's not very steady this way. So use the viewfinder and not the LCD for framing photographs once you leave your point and shoots and come a little higher. It always is better to be able to use this for the taking the photograph. Now there is a current generation of cameras where they feel that viewfinders are superfluous. It is called the ILR, interchangeable lens cameras. They don't have a viewfinder and they have only the LCD. Lenses can be changed, but you are forced to use it like this and frame your photographs. Okay, so in case some of you are starting to go to DSLRs and still are not being able to kick your habit of using the LCD for taking the photographs, kick it. The earlier you do it, the better photographs you will be able to take more comfortably. Okay, these are some of the things that I had downloaded from the net. None of these photographs are mine, so I should be giving credits to this author. So this is what I was telling. Holding it like you hold a point and shoot. Holding it like you are going to drink water off for this one. This gives a lot of strain on your arm like this. One, your arm is up and out and it doesn't allow you to turn your zoom or the focus ring adequately. It gives you a lot of strain on you. Whereas when you do this, your fingers will take the strain of it and it is very convenient. So what is the right way of holding the DSLR? Here is the right way of holding the DSLR. And when you hold the DSLR like this, you can comfortably hold 2.5 to 3 kgs worth of equipment in your hands for a whole day and keep shooting. Some of my 150-500 which I have not brought here is 1.9 kgs just the lens alone, and we shoot birds with it, which means that they are flying objects and you can comfortably shoot with just this. If you try any other way of handling the camera, the risk will go. Okay. This is for all these things I have already told, and this is especially when you had a flash, a good flash, that is another 700-800 grams on your camera. However, when you want to shoot in the, that is for the landscape mode. This is the landscape mode. This is the portrait mode. So when you want to shoot in the portrait mode, again, trying to shoot like this is very awkward. It doesn't allow you to take photographs properly. The angle at which you can turn is also not all that comfortable. So you are going to hold it up like this. And there you go. So this is the way to hold when you are going to use a in the portrait. Sometimes some set patterns are already developed, so you are worried, you are not very comfortable initially, but when you start practicing, these things will become second nature. Yeah, I know. I'll tell you. So this is one of the professional cameras. You have two things. See, mine had one handle here, and if I had to do vertical shot, I had to do this. Now here is another camera which has a built-in vertical one is also has a. If I had to do vertical, I can use this. So it is exactly like I'm using, whether I'm using landscape mode or whether I'm using vertical mode. You have another shutter release and another set of same shutter release functionalities here. So this is the professional cameras. I think they are in the range of 1.5 to 4 lakhs. Yes, 1.5 to 4 lakhs. Just the body alone. So this will, because professionals need to be taken in either direction whole day long. So and they have to save their wrists and arms also. So this is available in certain cameras that you can use it the same way. You need not do this. You can hold your hand like this. I told you when I was telling about holding the camera up like this, that is strain on the shoulder. If you do this, that is going to be the strain, but it's definitely going to be less than if you do this because the weight of the camera is on this. So if you have a shutter release here, this is available for this kind of cameras. The others also in about 15 to. This kind of functionality is available with what is known as a previously it used to be the motor drive which used to come separately. Now it comes as a battery, additional battery. So that one will have the same functionality which fits here. Okay, so that is available for quite less. It's not very expensive compared to the camera. You don't have to have a 2 lakh camera to have that functionality. So this is about how to handle the camera. While point and shoots are easier to handle, the quality of photographs that you are going to get are not comparable to DSLRs in certain terms. However, composition, the subject and other things is what will make the photograph better, and that remains the same whether you use a cell phone camera or you use a DSLR or anything in between. Therefore, if you have the eye for the photograph, eye for picking out the subject, then you will be able to get very good photographs even with just your point and shoot. It doesn't mean that having a very good DSLR is necessary for taking good photographs. So today I will be focusing on composition mainly. The other things we can have a discussion. The most important thing while you photograph is your subject. So make sure that you identify your subject and then you isolate the subject. Otherwise, it will be like this. You have the subject here, which is lost in all that background. Here you have another subject. For a butterfly enthusiast, this might be a good photograph. Everything is clear, sharp, well lit. But for a photographer, this is not a very great photograph. It's in the center. The butterfly is seen, but so is a lot of other things. It doesn't really catch your eye. Isolate the butterfly like this. How to isolate? We'll come back later. But isolate your subject. I do a lot of nature and landscape photography, so a lot of my photographs will be this rather than portraits and other things. But the principles remain similar. So isolate your subject out from the back into one of two ways. Either blur the background out. Make sure that the subject is single and not multiple. Here you have another picture where this is just isolated by diffusing the background. Here the subject is isolated by making the background dark. You have used appropriate settings so that only the subject is well lit and the background is blacked out. So you have isolated the subject by using light or by using an aperture or making the background blurry. There are other things about composition. I already saw somebody's notes with rule of thirds, so probably somebody has gone through these things before. But it is worth reiterating that the eye, when it sees physiologically, that is, the eye when it sees and the brain registers, it doesn't go to the center of any picture or any vision that you see. Even if you normally see, it doesn't see just go to the center. It usually goes to one of these thirds, one of the points which are crossed by the thirds. I have not put a grid there, which I should have probably. So these points will be, I'm more used to having the mouse and today I don't have. A point here, a point somewhere around here, a point here, and a point here. So this will be one of the thirds. So if you divide your picture into thirds, so for this functionality, I just put it up in one of friends, this one. If you just take your camera, many of the current cameras have what is known as grid lines, which you can incorporate onto your, as you are shooting itself, the grid lines will come in. Can I have that, sir? Your camera. So in your viewfinder, can everybody see this? Can you see the grid lines now?
Yeah.
Okay. Your camera itself, when you say grid line on, this is a functionality given even in simple point and shoots, because everyone now wants to shoot good photographs. So you put on the grid lines. You don't have to imagine where these thirds are. You can try and identify and put your subjects in one of these corners. You can see those 3 places or 4 places, no? Sorry. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, rather than the center. So if you put your subject there, the eye gets drawn to these areas. This is what is known as an asymmetric dynamics. But forget the names. Thank you. So you can put on your grid and then compose it such that the subjects go to these areas. Okay? There are a few times where you can break the rule, but most of the time it is worthwhile following the rule rather than breaking it. So if you put it in one of these 3 corners, it will be one of these 4 corners where the thirds are being broken. It usually gives a photograph with better impact. Second thing is, when you're trying to take the horizon, never hit the horizon bang in the middle, either this way or this way. So try and keep the horizon somewhere upper third or lower third. This helps to give you another asymmetry, which again gives better pictures. Here I think this the horizontal horizon is at 1/3 there. If I try to use my mouse, I think I'm also using pushing it forward. So okay. So that one is going at 1/3. The sky is just 1/3. There's not too much of clouds. It's blank there, so I don't want to show too much of the sky. But the sea and the foreground has got a lot of material there, so I want to use 2/3 for this. If it was the other way around, the sea is just only waves are there, and there's good clouds, and I want to show the sun and other thing, I will do the exact reverse. So, but not in the midline. This is another one which shows about the same rule of thirds, where the sun is somewhere between 1/3 up, 1/3 to the left, and the reflection is also down in the same line of the thirds. The water, the shadow, and the sky also is approximate 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So you can use your viewpoint in such a way that you get these thirds, and usually it gives a better impact photograph. There's another one here where the eye is right about the third. Sometimes you might not be able to fit everything into the thirds, but you can use the principle of asymmetry alone. There is also a rule of fifths, so you can have it at 1/5, 4/5, 1 or 2/5, 3/5, or whatever combination. So the general idea is not to put the subject bang in the center, but to put it somewhere in one of these areas so that you get an asymmetrical balance. Use lines to lead your person who is seeing into the subject. So use horizontal lines or curved lines to lead your the viewer into the subject. Here the lines which have been used are, here there is one line of the pathway, there is the other one of the rocks there is one more of the horizon, bridge, a lot of lines, and everything leads to that subject. So try and put your subject where these lines lead. So that gives another, it leads the eye of the person to your subject. It also does another thing. Photographs are 2D images. They are just two-dimensional. But if you use these lines appropriately, they will let you have a 3D perspective. So because it converges, we all know, the brain knows that these are parallel lines, and now it appears to converge, therefore it should be a 3-dimensional image. That is the impression that the brain gets. So use lines for convergence. This is otherwise called as perspective. So you can use lines for getting the perspective on. Here's another one where the lines are leading. There's no subject there, it's just lines which are leading into that. But if you put your subject into where these two lines meet, then you will have a photograph where there is somebody standing there or something like that. The lines lead on to your subject. Okay? So you can use lines this way. You can also use lines in various other ways. You can use lines to divide your photograph and focus on the subject. You can use lines. So these lines are there both in nature and man-made structures, and you can use these lines creatively to get a better photograph. Another thing is about composition. We are seeing is diagonal composition. Midline I was telling. Don't use the midline bang in the center. It doesn't really give a high impact image. Using a diagonal composition gives a better image quality. Here's another diagonal composition where the subject is well seen. Use of frames. Try to get your subject framed. This helps again concentrate the person who is seeing it and gets the subject highlighted better. So a sunset framed in the windows, the eye framed by the hair. This is not my photograph, this has been borrowed. Frame the person with whatever is available. You can use frames of pillars, you can use the trunk of a tree and the branch of a tree to frame your subject or this one. But use of frames isolates the subject from the rest of the crowd. Another thing that we can do to improve the composition is to use viewpoint of the camera. It's very dull and drab to just stand, take one photograph and walk. As it has happened is that it only says that Dr. Kumaravel was there at Sanchi. That's all that shows in that photograph. Whereas if you alter your viewpoint, you see there's one image here. There's one image here where the boat has been taken from a very low angle to emphasize and get a better picture. There's one more, a very high angle. These are unusual angles. You will get them in every picture that you can. You will be able to get a viewpoint that is unique to you, and that will give a better photograph than what you will otherwise get just by standing. So when you see something you want to photograph, walk around a little, forward, backward, up, down, and see which viewpoint gives you a better photograph. And since it's the digital world, you can always take one shot of where you are standing and then do all this up, down, this way, that way. When I started photography with my film, I couldn't do that. I had to get the shot because otherwise I'd be paying for every frame and every film, and I can carry only 36 photographs or 2 rolls at one point in time. So that currently it is not. You can carry 1000 photographs in your camera if you have a 16 GB card. Even with a 12 megapixel camera, you can carry 1000. So it's not much of an issue. Add a dash of human element. This human element gives better impact to most pictures. Well, that's not a bad sunset picture. It's got the sun, it's got golden waves. Adding people into the photograph gives it a better image. Here's another one, again with a human impact. This also shows a few other things. The lines lead on to the subject. The subject is at the thirds. The sun. This kind of composition can be made, but it will take a little bit of thinking there, walking around to get the exact composition that you want to show. Creating a mood with the light. This is where having more controls on your camera comes in. But now most of the cameras, even the simple point and shoot, give you this functionality. They may not call it the manual mode and allow you to adjust the aperture or something like that, or the shutter speed, but they give you some functionality which you can tweak to get better photographs. If you point the camera at this as any of the point and shoot, or even your regular camera with DSLR in the program mode and shoot, you will get the elephant nicely lit, the background totally washed out, white, and none of this grass and other things will be visible. So you have to cut down on the amount of light that the camera is getting, so that you can get this entire thing in a silhouette and you can get some details of the sky and the grass and other things back. So how do we go about it? We can do it either by increasing your aperture or decreasing your shutter speed, but these are not available in most of the point and shoot cameras. So how do we go about it? Again, can I borrow your camera, sir? Can I borrow your camera? I think that is. So you will have something like this EV which is written here. So this is there in most of the cameras which are not SLRs. SLRs you can directly go and start handling your aperture and shutter speed and do that. Or you can go into your in program mode or in aperture priority mode, you can go and use the same functionality, the EV functionality. This EV will allow you to decrease the light. It will tell your camera, you judge and then give me less by 30% light, less by 50% light, less by 75% light. So that is what this EV is going to tell you, and it is put as -1 is less by 100%, -2 is less by 200%, +1 is more by 100%, and +2 is more by 200%. So you can adjust this EV to get low light photographs like this, silhouettes, as well as. So even with your point and shoot, you should be able to get photographs, control the light without directly working on the aperture and shutter speed. Okay, am I clear about this? So this is one thing which is good about the newer cameras. So even though they don't give you actually allow you to handle, it allows you to control the amount of light, and therefore you can get better functionality out of your camera. Thank you once again. Here's another light. That one was, this is with mist, so it is a low key, more whitish. That one was in the evening, more reddish. So you can get these kind of photographs by working with the light that you have. Here are a few other photographs. That's our friend there. Okay. So using backlit photographs, again using the light to get backlit photographs like this, it gives a very image with a lot of impact. Next is to capture motion. Do we capture motion by showing, you want to show that there is some action going on. You can show this by two ways. One, you freeze the action. The second is you allow the action to proceed and show the blur of the action. Both are effective ways of showing action. Here, the run is frozen. The water droplets are frozen there. So this you require a high shutter speed. If you do not have, if you cannot control the shutter speed on your cameras, you can use. They have several modes which are available. Go to one of the special modes and choose sports. Automatically, the point and shoot cameras will take a higher shutter speed. That is possible. So you can capture fast images also, motion and blur. I mean, you can freeze the motion by using one of those, or on your DSLR you can increase your shutter speed. You can decrease your shutter speed to an appropriate level. Usually, this kind of freezing requires 1/1000th or 1/2000th of a second.
Did you say high shutter speed or low speed?
Okay, shutter speed. I will tell you. You have to have a shutter speed which is fast enough, because it is 1/1000th. No, you can call it whichever way you can understand it. Okay. If you want to freeze, you have to have a very fast shutter speed. Okay. Now you can also show the water movement of the water, and by allowing to blur, and then say that yes, there is motion going on here. So both ways are possible. You can freeze the action, or you can blur, allow the part of this one to blur, and therefore show the motion. Here I have given two of the same. Here it is frozen. The water droplets are like stone. They are all standing there, and there you are seeing the milky white of this one. Both have their own place. Both are high impact pictures. They will allow you, but you have to decide where and what to use. Okay, so both are available for use. This photograph, this is also taken by me. This is obviously a bad photograph, and this one, I'm telling you, I'm showing you this because there are difficulties with motion blur. What are the problems with this photograph? Anybody wants to?
Shaking?
Yeah, there is more. Obviously, there is a shake. There is a blur because of, not only because of movement of the water, but there is also blur because of camera shake. One. Anything else?
Too much exposure.
Yes. So highlights are blown. This is what we call highlights are blown. That means there is no detail in this. Here the details are lost. There the stone also is showing that motion. So there are difficulties to get a good motion blur, because you are going to use a very large, very slow shutter speed. So if you are going to use a slow shutter speed of say 1/20th of a second or 1/15th of a second, the hand is usually not steady enough to take photograph, especially if you have heavy equipment. Okay. So what are the things that you can do to avoid this? One is you should have an aperture which is sufficiently high, which will allow you to give a slow shutter speed. And this concept of shutter speed versus aperture, which is inversely proportional. The product of the two should be your ideal light amount that is required. So the product of the two. So that means that if your aperture keeps going up, if you use a high enough aperture, then you will get light which is going into your camera, which is of slow enough, which is less enough, so that you can use a slow shutter speed. Okay. So you are using a slow shutter speed. It is ideal to use these things with a tripod. If you cannot, if you are not, obviously this is on top of some hill, mountain, whatever, and there is water. If you are not able to carry a heavy enough tripod with you, then you should either support yourself on the back. So you can use a support. Go to a rock, support yourself, support your arm, or get your elbows down on something like this, and you can support your elbow. These things will allow you to take a shot which is of a longer duration without having a camera shake. Okay, so there are difficulties while taking these photographs. Just because we have a camera which is capable of taking these photographs, it will not be that the photograph will come out on its own. You have to use these other things to get a good photograph.
So one thing, sir.
Yeah, tell me.
So you have shutter speed low and high. So sometimes
We'll take it as instead of low and high, make it fast and slow so everybody understands.
No, if you do not use that speed,
Yes.
low and high, if there is a mode that is auto mode, if you take that way, then what will be the, what will happen about the photograph?
Yeah, you will not see. whenever a camera decides to take the photograph, it just takes with adequate light. All that it knows is so much light is required for me to take the photograph. That's all the camera knows. It doesn't know that you want the motion to be blurred or you want the motion to be frozen. The camera doesn't know that. So it will just take one general photograph where all the light, all the elements will be well lit. Okay, so that might not be of a slow enough for a shutter speed for this to blur like this. Because for the water to blur like this, you have to have a slow shutter speed. For the water to be frozen, you have to have a high shutter speed. So if you take in auto mode, the camera will just give you a general picture where it will not show you this kind of water motion at all. You will just see water there. That's all. You will be able to see that there is water there. There is a waterfall. But if you want to actually change the photograph in such a way that the motion is blurred, then you will have to decrease your shutter speed. That is, you will have to get a slow shutter speed. And to get that, what you will have to do is you will have to work with one of the other modes on your, if it is a point and shoot. If it is a DSLR, you choose an aperture which is high. Okay.
So like the one you said as a sports for faster ones.
Yes.
Do you have any auto or slow?
No.
Would like to
Please.
Can
Please.
Yes.
what do you mean by saying that you have an auto? Now, what is that auto? What do you mean by it? Is it that auto means auto priority, I mean aperture priority, or is it that your camera is just auto?
Yes, there is a
What is it?
that is auto, all are adjusted inbuilt, something like that.
No, it cannot be that way. It's something. Suppose I'll
No, that
tell
is
you.
some I adjust, that is manual adjustment and then auto.
Auto, okay, fine. Now I get it. Now, if you have an auto and you do not have the facilities like our doctor explains to us by saying that you reduce the speed or increase the speed and things like that, what you can do is, now, in an auto, suppose we will take this subject only, right? In auto, what happens is that when you focus, when you point your, there is some kind of a focusing range, isn't it? That focusing range speaks about your aperture as well as the speed.
Right, that is also correct.
Correct?
Yes. So
All
the
right.
auto will work.
No, wait. For that, now you want to see that this is a fast moving thing, isn't it? This is fast, right? But these are all steady, right? So what you have to do is experimenting. Be there, focus here, take maybe a slightly lower shutter, okay, or an open aperture or a higher aperture and a lower speed, the shutter. Then you see this. When you see this, are you happy with the flow? If not, then go to a darker area. Click. It will be a lower shutter, correct? It will be maybe 130 or 120. Then, because of the half shutter, you have to press half shutter. Move it, compose your picture, click. You may get what we can get. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I hope it's okay.
Excellent. So you can compose your photograph based on different areas of where your this one is. See, how does when you asked about auto mode now, how does the camera realize, how does it realize that this one is light is adequate? So what it does is, you have those small boxes where you are going to use to focus. There is a small box which will come here. That is the area in which it is going to take that as your main part of your subject, and it evaluates the scene completely. And once you press this halfway, it stops calculating there.
Right.
So that is why practice taking this photograph as half click first and then another click to take the full photograph. So the half click, half shutter press gives you both focus lock as well as exposure lock. So once exposure is calculated, and then keeping this pressed, if you move around, it will not change the calculation again. That is how what sir was telling will work. Okay, so that is another way you can use it. But for as somebody is asking, is there a way to get? Is there anything else to bypass this? For fast, you have the regular. For slow, you can use the portrait mode. Even though the portrait mode will work with a slightly larger this one. So actually, for slowing down, there is no actual this one. But for speeding up, that is to get a higher, faster shutter speed, there is a way workaround. Using the regular one, you can use what sir has so nicely highlighted. Okay. Coming to another imaging modality which gives you an image of speed is panning. Again, that photograph is not mine, it has been borrowed to show you the principle of panning. So, for panning, what you need to do is you need to move the camera. While all this time I was telling hold the camera steady, put it on a tripod to get it steady and other things. You need to move the camera in such a way that the subject and the camera are at rest to each other. That means both of them follow the same point. So, because both of them are in line with each other, while the subject is moving, you are also moving your camera at the same speed, at the same this one, keeping it steady. So what happens is the rest of the things are blurred. So that is how we are going to get the picture like this, where the water is blurred, the boat is still sharp, the car is sharp, but the road and the background is all blurred. Okay? So how do we do this? This requires a little practice. What I usually do is keep feet apart, hold it as usual, and compose. When you are composing, keep your, there's a small box whenever we, okay, can you see this red box? Okay, that's there in every camera, it will be there. That is where you are going to focus. So use that box to frame your picture and keep your subject within that box. Okay, as you are moving, keep that subject within that box so that the subject is relatively at rest compared to your camera. That means your camera and the subject are not moving. With respect to each other, they are not moving. Both of them are in the same position. While the rest of it will blur out. This is something which you can practice. There are now a lot of highways around. Just go to this one, everyone is zooming across and you will get excellent panning shots there. You just have to make sure that you are not on the road, you are a little away from the road. Okay? Okay. So what we usually do is hold like this, and then I'm showing this on the LCD so that you can see, but don't use the LCD, it's very difficult to get it with the LCD. It is easier to get it with the viewfinder. You have the same thing in your viewfinder and then keep moving as the person moves. Start your clip somewhere 1/3 during your movement and continue to move and the shutter will close by itself. Do we require really low shutter speeds to get a blur like this? Actually no. You don't require a 1/20th or a 1/30th shutter speed to get this, because when you do that, if your hands are not steady, you will get what is known as, you will get the vertical axis blur because your hand is not steady. So you can do, it depends on how fast the subject is moving. If the subject is moving very fast, then you can even use 1/125th of a second, which is what usually we will use to take shots and get good shots. So you can even use 1/125th of a second or 1/250th of a second and still get good panning shots. That speed is enough to get this panning shot. However, if you use 1/30th, you will still get a better one, but you might lose the entire shot because the subject is also blurred because of a vertical blur. That is because of motion. So you can use relatively fast shots. You require a slower shutter speed if the subject is slow. Suppose you are taking a person who is running rather than a motorcycle which is zooming past you. Then you will have to use a slower shutter speed. Okay, is that clear? Okay. So far, is there anything that you want to discuss, ask? I think for many people, I see a lot of people who have come with DSLRs and high-end zooms. This might have been very basic, this one. I could have come prepared with something a little more higher, more on aperture, shutter speed, and how to work around with them. But I thought this was basic class being the first one, so I came with some very basic things.
I have one question.
Yes.
Just explain what the shutter speed using. You got a very fast object moving motorcycle,
Yes.
and your person not running fast.
Yes.
So you said shutter speed would be
Yeah. So basically, for panning, suppose a person is running and you want to take his photograph. Because he is running slow, if you take 1 by 1/25th of a second, it will freeze motion for him. I'm not talking about panning, I'm just taking a regular photograph. You can control the shutter speed, so you want to take a photograph of somebody running. You don't want him to be blurred, you want him sharp there. So you click, say 1 by 1/25th of a second, he will stop. Whereas a motorcycle is going very fast. Even in the 1 by 1/25th of a second, you would have moved a amount of distance, and that will be registered as a blur. So if he is moving fast, the motorcycle is moving fast, you have to freeze that action, you might have to take 1 by 1000th of a second. Okay. So you take faster shutter speed for a faster moving object. This is for regular photograph. The same thing holds good for panning also, because if you have a slow moving shot and if you take 1 by 1/25th, the background may not be blurred enough because you have only moved so much. Whereas if the motorcycle is zooming past, when you are moving your camera like this, you are also going very fast. Okay? So the background will be blurred enough and the person and the subject that you are taking will be frozen even if you take a faster shutter speed.
you don't need to go to sports.
Okay. Since
Or multi-
multiple shots and other things are not to get, say, when you are talking about getting sharp image is one issue. Second is getting a sharp image with the background blurred is another issue. There are two issues here. So if you go to sports mode or if you go to fast image like multiple shots, you will freeze the action, but everything will be frozen. The thing in front, at the back, everything is frozen. Therefore, you will get the person frozen. Your subject will be sharp, but the background and foreground are also likely to be sharp. Okay, that will depend only upon your how you get bokehs. That's what how you get your background out of focus. That will be the only thing that will allow you to get. Whereas suppose the runner in one of these races that they go, they go very close to the edge of the thing. So the motorcyclist is going very close to the edge of that, and there are letters written there. If you take a shot, because both of them are near to each other, both of them will be frozen and both will be sharp, which does not convey that meaning of or the essence of speed. What you are trying to show in this picture is that it is going so fast. It's going so fast that action you want to show. That will not be there. I could have taken this at 1 by 1000, 1 by 2000th of a second. The water will be sharp, like you will see in many of the sunsets that I had shown on the sea. And this will also be sharp, but that effect of motion is not shown. Which is why you want to create a blur of the surrounding things, but keep your subject sharp. Okay? So you cannot use a sports mode for that because it will give you a very high shutter speed and stop at that. For panning, you should use a slower shutter speed than what you would require to freeze the motion, but it not be very slow, because everybody thinks that for the background to blur, you require 1 by 20th of a second or 1 by 30th of a second. That is usually the discussion that I have seen online also. You don't require so slow shutter speed. For cars, about 1 by 250th of a second. For motorcycles, about 1 by 250th of a second. For a runner, about 1 by 100, 1 by 50 to 100 for a runner. You can even get for walking people you can do, but then that will be very slow shutter speed. So that said, if you have a better lens which has this vibration reduction. So vibration reduction is a facility technology that is available in current lenses or cameras where your vibration, your handshake will be taken care of by lenses which shift inside according to how your hand is shaking. Okay? So you will still get a sharp image even if you use slow shutter speeds. But here when you are doing panning, you don't want your shake to be taken care of. You want the camera or the lens to allow the shake to take care of. But at the same time, you don't want this vertical mobility to occur. So they have got something known as VR1, VR2. Okay, VR1 will take off all handshakes and VR2 will take off only vertical handshake and allow the horizontal handshake to occur. Okay, so if you have advanced lenses, you might still be able to use vibration reduction for panning shots. That brings me to the point which I forgot to tell you actually. If you are going to do panning and you have a VR lens, switch off your VR. Otherwise your camera and you are fighting against each other trying to get the shot. Okay, if you have a lens which has got VR, or in your Canon it will be called IS, which is image stabilization, or in your Sigma it is called OS, which is optical stabilization, or I think in Tamron it is called VC, which is vibration control. So different names for the same technology to reduce shake. Switch it off if you are going to do your panning shots, unless you have these advanced VR1, VR2 kind of technology.
And if one takes at night this shot,
Yes, yes.
then the shutter speed should be
Slow. So when you are taking a night shot where you want this trail of car lights, for example, that's what I think you are talking. In that case, you really have to take it for a long speed. That means you put it on a tripod and keep a second, 1 second, 2 seconds. Otherwise, you will just see small dashes. You will not get an image which is well lit enough. So you really require 1 second, 2 second, or 3 second shots, which I think is humanly impossible to hold handed. Some occasional shots you might get. I think the fastest I have done is about a half a second shot or something like that. But occasionally only you will be able to get away with it. To really get a good shot, keep it. You can even keep it on one of the walls, parapet walls. I have taken photographs. Keep it on the parapet wall if you are not lugging around a tripod. But keep it on something. And to avoid the shake of your shutter release itself, put it on a 2 second delay, timer delay. Put it on a 2 second delay. Press it, stand back, enjoy the scene, take it, and then see. If it does not come adequately, you can increase the shutter speed. That means go to a slower shutter speed. Usually for those kind of shots, you will require at least a 2 or a 3 second shot. It also depends on how much light is there because of a traffic light or ambient light, how much is there. Because if that is too much, then your whole shot will be white out. So that also you need to see. You need to take a place which has not got so much ambient light, but still enough to get good.
But when you take slow shutter speed,
Yes.
daytime,
Yes.
the opening of the aperture has to be.
Yes,
If
yes.
you
That
keep
is
it
exactly
big,
the
then everything
point.
is washed out.
Yeah. The whole point of working with aperture and shutter speed in DSLR is because the two things. Can we take this up, sir? Do we have a marking pen? It's okay. Otherwise, keep it until that time, and then it's okay. Yeah, it goes.
There should be some lock.
Yeah. But marking. So, which is that part of this one I have not prepared for, but I can always tell you. See, basically, the amount of light that is required to get a good photograph. Say the adequate amount of light to get a good photograph is say X units, whatever that units are. It is X. So you need that much amount of light to get a well exposed photograph. Now how does this light enter into the camera and how does it expose whatever, whether it's a sensor here or the film in the voltage, whatever. How does it do that? It goes through a small aperture. There is a hole in the camera through which it goes. That hole, you can control the size of that hole by using the aperture control. Okay? So obviously if you have a larger opening, more light will enter, and if you have a smaller opening, less light will enter. Just to confuse issues and make your life more miserable, what they have done is, as the size number of this aperture comes down, actually the size of the hole is bigger. Okay? That makes life miserable for all of us who are starting. But after you start using it, it becomes easy to remember. Which means that when a lens says 1.2 is my aperture, it means that is the biggest hole that you will get. 1.2 is quite a large size, and lenses of 1.2 will be costing in lakhs because it is you require to get the glass for such a big size of aperture. Okay, whereas f32, when we say, that is among the smallest sized aperture, which will be hardly be about 1 millimeter in size. Okay, so this one discrepancy in naming, you have to remember, is basically because it is a function of 1 by how much light. That is why, because it's 1 by that, this confusion occurs. Otherwise, there is no confusion. Once you get it into your system that as the size number decreases, the aperture size increases. So if you have a large aperture, more light is entering. So for these X units, if more light comes in because of a large aperture, you require a very small amount of time for which that light has to hit your sensor or your film before you get that adequate exposure. So if you get 1 unit of light with 1 aperture, you want 1 unit of light to hit the screen. Your aperture is say 1 and your shutter speed is say 1. It gives you 1 unit of light. But suppose your aperture is twice this, that means the size of the opening is twice this, then you only require half the amount of time for the light to enter inside to see well or to get the good exposure. So that is what makes no, I
Just leave it.
yeah, it also has the same thing, but I think I can use the side. So if you have F32 is like this, F16 will be about this, and a 1.2 will be something like this. So you have a large aperture, and now you have to take your speed. So if you have a shutter speed for a 1.2, you require 1 by 1000th of the shutter speed. Say for this, you require 1 by 1000th of the shutter speed. For a f5.6, 1.2. After this is 1.4. After this will be 1.2. Because they are all root squares of each other, each one will double, but not 1, 2, 4 like that. Okay. 3.2 or whatever, 3.2, 3.6 around. And F5.6 will be about 4 times. So you require only 1 by 2.
Is there any formula?
Yeah, there are plenty of formulas, but I think it's easier. Easier trick is all your cameras will have a light meter inside, which is what it uses to see. So just go to the program mode and then, or your aperture priority mode, and then see, put it at 5.6 and see what is the shutter set, how much shutter speed it sets, because it's going to set it for the appropriate amount of light, and then you can calculate from there up down. And if you want to use a F8 will be the next, F5.6, F6.3 is available on your camera, but that is not half of F5.6. F8 is half of the F5.6. So you require 1 by 2, 1/25th of a second at F8. After that it's F16, and after that is there are in between apertures available, and there are in between shutter speeds also available. But this is just for you to understand that for between 5.6 and 8, 16, these will be about the common apertures that will be available on most of the lenses, standard lenses. Anything below this, if you want to get, you are going to spend quite a bit of money. There's a 1.8, which is okay. 1.4 and 1.2 are extremely expensive lenses. So this is, if you know about these 4, how much are you going to use, then it will be okay. And there is always the, what sir said, no? You take the photograph. Now digital photography is instant gratification. You just take the photograph and then have a look at the LCD back, you know about it, about whether it is okay or not. You don't have to wait 30 days and miss the shot. You just see, if you think that the highlights are blown, then you just adjust this up down according to what you want, and then you will get it. So what is it actually that we want? If you want a darker picture, suppose you have taken a photograph, you just ask the camera, you say put it in this P mode or the A mode, which is totally auto. A or P, the camera takes care of everything for you basically. So you take this mode and then you find that you have got a picture which is everything is white. You have not got anything clear, everything is white, which is what we call overexposed. I hope you don't mind, sir. No, I just leave it there. No, I think it will stay there. We'll see whether it's I'll write it lower, no problem. Okay.
It has gone. It has gone on.
Okay. So you have something which is overexposed. Like my waterfall shot that I had shown there, it is overexposed, it is white. It is more white than what you want. So you have overexposed. So what are the options that you have now to get a appropriate? So the camera is not able to take the decision. You let it take the decision and it gave you a picture which was more white than what you like. So you want to change the parameters such that you will get a better picture. So what are the options that you have now? As we discussed, we have two options. For now I leave ISO out of the picture. We will work with two. It's easier to work with two rather than with three. This is like juggling, no? That you see the magician throw 2 oranges, 3 oranges, 5 oranges. 2 oranges even I can do. 1 orange I think is no big deal.
And 3
2
oranges I can do.
3 oranges sir is better than me. That is exactly what I am trying to say. 2 I can do, 3 he can do, 5 you have to call a magician to do.
True.
So that is what we are trying to say. Keep the variables short, adequate enough to work, and then you can build up on that. So you have two. One is A for aperture and S for shutter speed. I think Nikon likes to be wants to be different. He doesn't want to do so. Or rather, I think Nikon still calls it yes. I think Canon wants to be different, and therefore he calls it T rather than yes. Okay. So he will call it TV, and the others call it yes. Okay. So you have two options to get a picture of an exposure which you want. So what are the things? So if you want an overexposed picture to come out well, you can change either the aperture or the shutter. So what will you do with the aperture? You will try and put it in you want less light to go, that is why the photograph has become more white, because there is more light going there. You want to decrease the amount of light. So you can go either one of the two ways. You can use either the aperture or the shutter speed. So if you want the shutter speed to be adjusted, what will you do? Say it was exposed at 1/250th of a second. That is what your camera is showing, and the aperture was say 5.6. But the picture that you got with the P mode with these things is that it is more white than what you like. You want to correct the exposure. So what will you do? You can do anyone? Not the last benchers are all pros.
You can increase the speed.
Yes, you can do an increase in the speed. So you can go to 1/500 or 1/1000. Take 2 shots and then see what has come. How has it changed your picture? Okay, that is one. Any other way? Okay, you can leave the shutter speed as it is, and aperture you can make it from 5.6. What will you make it to? Because now you have to give numbers to the camera, unfortunately. So how will you? What number will you give? You have to tell the camera to. Okay. So again, this one, because if you give 2.8, the aperture size becomes more light you get it. So actually, you have to start giving a number which is of a bigger size, because you want lesser number. You can either do a 8 or you can do a 16, because you have to adjust this. You have to give it as a number to the. There's another workaround to this. See, you saw that this is more. So all you do is go to your EV and then say I want 2/3 less light. If you're not comfortable with the numbers, Even that it has. It is called something else. It is called exposure. So you can go and then you can decrease the exposure by 1/3 or 2/3. Okay, but it is better to go this way. Once you have invested in the SLR, it means that you have put your foot into this one. Okay, you have already taken that step. So you might as well go the next step and learn about the rest of it. Okay, so you can put an aperture of 8 or an aperture of 16 and then see whether it works. When will you take this decision of whether to use aperture or whether to use shutter? These are two things that we should discuss next. That is where the next part of the bouquet I stopped there, because that is where this comes in. Whenever you use an aperture which is more narrow, a byproduct of that, of using a narrow aperture, is that depth of field increases. What is depth of field? Now suppose I am looking at this pen here. The rest of you are not clear to me. Okay, this normal eye. I am looking at this pen. The rest of you I know are there, but I can't see details of each of you. Whereas I am looking at sir there. The entire thing is clear. So why am I giving this example? Because each of this is the depth of field. My eye, when I see the person who is that distance, can also make out details of some amount in front and some amount at the back. Okay? So the depth of field depends on many things. I will go through most of them, because most of the people who interact with me with this one, when you show them a picture with a nice smooth background, they ask, how is this possible? I have never been able to get it. Because that is one thing which many people want to get, what is otherwise called as a bokeh. Even though technically speaking bokeh is slightly more complicated than just that, getting a blurry background. But for this talk I will keep it as a blurred background. So how to get this? So depth of field depends on a lot of things, one of which is the aperture. So narrower the aperture, that means the higher the number, 8, 16, 32, you will get a large depth of field, which means that if I take your photograph, I will have 10 people behind you also in focus and sharp. Okay, if I take a photograph here, then all the people will be sharp and in focus, because the field that is sharp is larger. So I have to draw a diagram of that. Suppose my subject is here and so much in front and so much behind is also sharp. Okay, this is with an aperture, say X. Suppose I use the same thing with an aperture which is larger, that is the opening is larger, say a 1.4. This I have used say 8, 1.4. The aperture in front and back, that is the depth of field, will be very narrow. Okay, so coming back here, if you want a photograph where exposure is fine, exposure you will get a good exposure either if you get 8 or 16 or 1/500 or 1000, 1/1000. But if you use f16 to get the same good exposed photograph, you will also get a lot of other background sharp, which you might not want. So if you want a background which is blurred, you will increase your shutter speed to get the appropriate exposure. Whereas if you want to get more and more, you don't mind having a background which is also sharp. Okay, you are taking people, for example, I am going to take this class as a photograph of this class. I don't want only the first bench and the second bench to be sharp and all the rest of the people blurred. I want everybody. So I will use a aperture which is small, narrow. In which case I will accept this 1/250th of a second and go for a smaller aperture, such that the exposure remains the same, but your depth of field has increased. If you do not want this, you want the subject to be sharp, the rest of it to be blurred, then I will go for a higher shutter speed. I will use this and leave the aperture at say 5.6. This concept is clear? Okay, so even though the end result for exposure is the same, you take a decision of whether to increase the shutter speed or decrease the shutter speed, increase the aperture or decrease the aperture, based on what are the other things you want out of the photograph.
So what is the difference between the depth of 6 and between 5.6?
Okay, see, since it is digital age, previously it used to be with mechanically. So you turn the knob so much that aperture will open so much. Whereas here it is digital. So f-stops of in between 5.6 and 8 are also possible. So it is only a fraction of the same thing. Here, while I say from here to here it is 2. From 8 to 16 it is 2. Between 3.5 and 5.6, the difference is, again it is depends on 1 by square root actually of the light. That's how the calculation comes. That is why it is not 1.2 to 8 is not say it is 6 times, it will be 8 times rather than 6 times. You understand? No, it is not just a multiplication factor. It is a root factor. Okay? So it is still a fraction, but it is not twice, 2 times the fraction. Okay? Okay. Whenever they want to take a break, we should take the break. So everyone is ready for a break now? Give me 5 minutes. No problem. So if you are ready for a break, we'll just continue with this discussion and then have the break and then come back for the this one on how to get blurry background, what are the important things on that, and how to get isolation, subject isolation, and then we can have a little bit of interaction on the field here itself. Just identify a couple. Okay. Any other questions so far?
There's also connection between aperture and the focal length.
Okay, not aperture, depth of field and focal length. You are talking about depth of field and focal length or? Pardon?
F number and focal length.
No. F number depends on the size of the aperture. Okay. Whereas the focal length depends on the lens that is being made for you or the composition of lenses that has been made for you. What is important is that if you have multiple lenses for say a zoom lens, there are 20 components of this lens, and you want a 1.2 f for this, it's going to be extremely cumbersome for that fellow to actually manufacture a 1.2 f lens because the aperture has to be that big. Okay, that is why. Is that the reason why you are asking the question?
Yeah.
Because you are not getting a 300 mm f2 f 1.2. Nobody has heard of a 300 mm 1.2. I think the best is a 2.8 that you get, and that is 4 lakhs already. Okay, so the reason is there is no direct combat. If there is enough engineering potential and money being pumped into it, you can create a lens like that. Okay, but it is not feasible to have a lens of a 1.2 which is that big. It will also become more heavier. Okay, so aperture and f and the focal length are not directly related in any way. It is only because of engineering things. Whereas depth of field and focal length also there is a relationship. That I will be coming subsequently in that. About 5 or 6 points for you people to get better okay, so that is one of the things that we will do. Anything else? Yes, please.
When the object is moving, we have seen a panning shot.
Okay.
We can move the camera towards it and then we can freeze the object. But I've seen a friend of mine who has done an object which is stationary and he has made it as if it's moving. In MIT college, he won first prize and there was a plane which is stationary and the picture looks like it. If you see the photo, the plane is in front and it feels like it is moving towards you. So I thought like you can keep the camera towards and even if you push back or upwards, it can become like that way. But he told he never used any Adobe. So I don't know how to make it.
That is another way of doing that. That's a very nice way. Yeah. What you do is you keep your camera stationary, okay, and then zoom it from one corner to the other. Okay. Use a relatively large. I had one picture of that and I had done with Vivo. I had done it. So what you are actually doing is your picture first takes, suppose this is the picture and your subject is here. When it is 70 mm and your camera is, you can do bokeh so much easier than you can do it in the field. So that is anybody's. At the time of taking, you are not taken that, and these are things that you can correct in Photoshop later on. So you have a picture like this, which has a leaning water is like this, boat is like this, but everyone knows sea cannot be like this. So what you do is you go into Photoshop and then correct it, something like this, and straighten it out. So this type of cropping, people would consider it minor violation. Even though I think I can see him already frowning, even that is not accepted by most people. But this kind of cropping, okay, accepted. But if you go and take a whiteout sun and then you stick something else on it and then totally, it might give you a very good picture. And I will do it. I will compliment him on his photoshopping skills, not on his photography skills. So that's the entire set of skill set all together by itself. And so that we would not be discussing here. We will have another discussion for how to get better photographs out of Photoshop. So fine tuning. Yeah. Small amounts of fine tuning. There's another thing called noise reduction. See, noise is something where digitally when you take a photograph, you get some fine noise that is available, that comes on the lens. That alters your sharpness of the photograph. It makes it look very odd. It's not smooth. It looks rough. The photograph itself looks. This depends on a lot of things. One of which is ISO. Another is the type of the lens that you are using. If you use a 4 lakh lens on a full frame camera, the amount of noise that you get on that photograph is so much lower. But I cannot. It is not a problem of my photography skills. It is the equipment problem. So those things you can use. I feel that using noise reduction is not so wrong to use. Other people would differ on this. Whereas you can use ISO, you can control by using what these things. ISO is what is basically ISO is. It depends on the how much of gain the sensor is using. Therefore, if you use a higher ISO like 1600 or 3200, it amplifies the noise of the other light which is hitting on the sensor. That also causes a bit of noise or extra light which is not actually there. It is not there on this. That is causing extra because of the innate deficiency. Previously, it used to be on the film camera. What it used to be is basically it used to be the size of the silver halide. There are crystals. So if you use the ISO which is very small, say 64 or 50 or something, these crystals were very small. Okay. So the amount of light that fell on them, these crystals would not cause any alteration in the photograph. Whereas if you use a 3200 IS, I don't think there is, I think, just 1 or 2 film rolls which come with this kind of. They used to have a silver halide which were large, and therefore these crystals itself would cause alterations in your photograph. That is where the term noise came in. Okay, so this kind of noise is there even in digital world. It is not only in the film world; it is there in digital world also, and that is related to the gain that is available. So if you want to decrease the noise also depends on the sensor size. So noise is much more on all the point and shoot cameras compared to a DSLR, which is the DX version, that is 1.6 or 1.5 version that I have. Compared to a full frame camera where the sensor is the full 35 mm by 25 mm size. Okay, noise will be much less on a full frame camera. But you can reduce this noise also in Photoshop. Okay.
In point and shoot, sometimes I had 3500 ISO.
Which one, sir? In?
The point and shoot camera.
Yes.
They write 3500 ISO, but it's tolerable only at 400. If you go to 1000, it's full of bits.
The idea of telling this the noise is high is that your photographs, even if you have taken a fantastic photograph, you will get a very bad looking image at the end of it if you use 1600, 3200 or so in that range with a point and shoot. Even with my D90, I am not happy beyond 800. The D7000, which is about 1.5 times the cost of this body, even that is it is better. Up to 1600 is acceptable.
But why should they write 3500?
That is because it will sell. Otherwise, it is like us discussing what is the point in having a 16 megapixel camera when I can take a 8 megapixel is about all that I am going to utilize. It is like that. If you write 54 megapixel, people will queue up in front of that camera more than they will queue up in front of 8 megapixel camera. That is the only. In fact, the more megapixels you pack onto a smaller sensor, the more the problems. The image quality can actually go down. You might not get a better image quality. You might actually get a poorer image quality because it's also packed into the sensor, which is so small.
But the high-end cameras, 5000 ISO, there are less grains.
Yeah.
Compared, there are more grains.
Yes, exactly.
What is the difference? Why the?
It is this is because of the sensor size. The sensor size of a full frame camera is 35 mm by 25 mm, or in that range. I mean, 1 to mm or half mm this way that way. But this is a full frame camera. Examples of this, the new one would be the D800, D800E, D700. This from the Nikon series, or the Mark 3. What was it? 5 D5, 7D, 5D, the new one which is going to come 6D, 1D. These are all full frame cameras, which means that the sensor on the camera is large. So when the sensor is large, the amount of light that it can capture is higher of each of these pinpoint, the points that are capturing the light it can capture is higher. Therefore, since it can capture more light, there is less amount of noise that is generated, or the gain when it is generating the gain, there is less amount of noise. This noise is what we see. It is like tuning your FM radio. You go slightly away from the actual station area, you will hear a lot of noise. You will hear the radio, this one, you will hear that noise. This is the similar noise in terms of light. That's why it's called noise. It's not the actual light that is coming, but it is the noise generated. Whereas in case of our it is 1.5 times smaller. This is the DX camera that most of us I see. I think sirs is the only full frame camera that I have seen.
No.
Yours is
DX.
yours is a D.
Oh.
Yours is a D2X.
D2X.
Okay. Sirs is also a DX. What we have here is the Canon is even smaller. It is 1.6 times smaller. Okay, this is the 1000 to 60D, 1000D, whatever, 1000 next is I think 450, 350, 450, 550, 600D, the Canon series, or the D90D, 3100, 5100, 7000, D7000, this series. These are all called DX cameras, and they have a sensor which is 1.5 times smaller than the full frame. Therefore, the amount of space that they have for these light generation is smaller, and therefore the amount of noise is higher. These cameras that we have, they are 5 times smaller than. Here only, this is 1.5 times smaller. This is 5 times smaller. All the point and shoots, give or take a small percentage, 1%, 2%, but they are 5 times smaller. That is why they are able to get 5 times the noise. This one, what do you say, zoom capability. It contains 1000 mm zoom is now I think the market standard for the long zooms. It is 1000 mm. Almost all companies have come out with the 1000 mm, 800 to 1000 mm zoom. All the long zooms have come out with. So this has got 300. The one which I had, SX10. Yes, the zoom is not so good.
I didn't know, and by seeing the zoom only I got the camera.
No, the thing is, but it still has a lot of functionality where you will get good photographs. But the sensor is small. Yes, sensor is one of the main things, and it is for that sensor that you have to pay so much more. Because this D800 is 1.5, this is 1.6, this is 1.2. My D90 was, I think body was 39,000, the D7000 is something like 54,000. So you are paying so much more. And for these 1000 mm long zooms, it's all 24 to 29,000. This is with the lens. These are all without lens at all. So you are paying more for getting a better functionality. And your cell phone cameras are about 1/20th of your. So even if you get a 20 megapixel cell phone camera, it will not be as good as a D40 which is 20 or 30 years old with a 5 megapixel sensor. Okay, I think we'll take a break now before everybody falls asleep, falls off, and then we can have a little more discussion. One is on bouquets. Yeah, you are welcome to interact with me at any point, with tea, without tea, everything.